Welcome to Democratic Television, a program of the Santa Clara County Democratic Party that brings insights, perspectives, and attitudes of our always thoughtful Democratic guests. Our focus today is on state government, and our guest is Ann Ravel. She's a candidate for California State Senate, District 15. Ann, welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. So in the beginning of our shows, we like to help our audience understand a little bit of the perspective of where our guests come from, like what your early life, what brought you to the place where you entered into public service. Mm-hmm. And if I remember correctly, you have an interesting childhood. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you. I grew up in Chile until I was about 10 years old.
Wow.
And it was a really good experience because I learned when I came back to the United States, I felt like a foreigner. Mm. And that made me pretty sensitive to people who come here who have to adapt from other countries. Mm-hmm. When I was a little older. But then we came to San Jose. And I went to junior high and high school in San Jose. My father was a professor at San Jose State in meteorology.
Ah, interesting. Which high school did you happen to attend?
I went to Willow Glen High School.
Fabulous. In Chile, what brought your family to Chile?
Well, I have an even more interesting background a little bit in that my mother is Brazilian and my parents met in Latin America.
I see.
But then they came back to the States. I was born in the States. And my father went back, supposedly, in what was called a Point 4 program. It was part of the Marshall Plan in the mid-50s.
I see.
And he was supposedly setting up weather stations. But when we came back from Chile, we went to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, where my father had a job. And I recently talked to someone who was the Attorney General previously from Arizona, and he said, oh, Fort Huachuca, that's where all the CIA go.
Ah, well, I'm going to stop you. I don't want you to share any
accidentally
any national secrets from your father's work in Chile.
I never knew that. And my parents died when they were pretty young.
Yes.
So I never had an opportunity
really
to
explore
ask.
that. Wow, how interesting. Mm-hmm. Well, weather's an important aspect of, weather can affect, as we know from the climate change debate, it can be of concern. It can really affect politics and world events.
Precisely.
Yes, interesting. Well, so landing back in San Jose, was that an adjustment for you? At home, did you speak English in Chile or Spanish or a little both?
A little bit of both.
I see.
Mostly because there were so many other people around who spoke Spanish. Mm-hmm. So I'm lucky. I speak Spanish pretty fluently, and I also speak Portuguese because my family is all in Brazil.
Ah, fabulous.
So it wasn't a really big adjustment, although I did feel a little bit like I didn't fit in to some degree. But
now San Jose now has I don't know in the day when you first moved here has a fairly substantial, of course, Latino population, and it has a Portuguese community as well.
That's true, which is wonderful, I think. But when I was in Willow Glen High School, they had a tracking system, and we never saw those people.
Interesting. A tracking system, not in a good way, meaning
not
that people
in
tracks and those students were in other schools and not in different programs?
They were in the same school, but they were not in the same classes.
Yeah, so different, same spaces, but adjacent, really.
Exactly, and those are some of the things that were really determinative of why I've become involved in public service, because I saw that there was that kind of discrimination, and then when I was in high school, I did what many people in high school and junior high did in San Jose at the time. I worked in the fields. I picked fruit. I picked fruit from trees.
Wow.
I cut cots. I like to say I did everything with an apricot because I also worked in the canneries in the summer.
Yeah.
And I saw...
The other kids work in the canneries? It sounds like kind of an industrial place. Is it safe to do that?
Well, all I did was stand on the assembly line and pick out the apricots that were bad.
Right.
But what I saw, that's when I saw lots of Latino women who were also on the assembly line, and where I knew that the women were getting paid a lot less than the men who worked there, who walked around the canneries and pressed buttons to start or stop the assembly lines. And it was hard work. And those women, I also knew because I talked to them, had children that they were supporting. We weren't wealthy, but I wasn't worried about having to support anybody with my money.
Why do you think that's been so persistent? Because, today in 2019, we're still talking about, and it's well documented, the very substantial pay difference between men and women. Why has that persisted so much? Why do we stand for it, men and women?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think that it is pervasive. It's still a really huge pay gap in the United States. And I think that there hasn't been the will to bring people up. And I know that there is some change now. The state legislature, Hannah Beth Jackson has, and others, they've had bills that say, first off, you cannot ask someone what their former pay scale was when you employ them, because that is one way that women have always
down on a lower pay track.
Always. And so there's movement to try to make changes that way. But CEOs of companies are notoriously all white men, and there's still, even to this day, very few women on boards of private companies, and so this is also something that needs to be changed.
Baked in, it's like systematically perpetuating itself.
Exactly.
So in San Jose, you settled in, and did where did you? What happened after high school? Did you go to college?
The first year, I went to Reed College in Portland, Oregon for 1 year. But I had skipped a grade in part because I was in Latin America and the year was different, the seasons were different. And so, but I was very young and it really wasn't a good adjustment. Plus, I longed to be home in California. That was when the mamas and papas were singing California Dreaming.
So it was making you homesick.
Very homesick. So I transferred to Berkeley.
I see.
I graduated from Berkeley with a degree in philosophy.
Good for you. So now philosophy at Berkeley, and your reference to the mamas and papas makes me think that it must have been an interesting time to be studying philosophy at Berkeley. Was it an interesting era for you?
It was an interesting era, and there was a big difference between being at a small school and being at Berkeley, where I spent most of my time demonstrating and joining the Students for Democratic Society and SNCC and CORE. I was quite an activist.
Did that put you in tension with your parents or others in your family? Because San Jose, I remember 30 years ago, San Jose seemed like a conservative place to me, and it's transformed quite a bit in the last 30 years. But was Berkeley much more liberal than San Jose at that time? Or?
I think Berkeley was somewhat more liberal than San Jose at the time, although I still remember when I was in high school, I was a member, I used to volunteer at the San Jose Peace Center, and with my brother, we went to a lot of demonstrations for civil rights in San Francisco mostly, not in this area. So this was something, my parents were very supportive of this. On the other hand, what I was involved in was going against the Vietnam War, my father was a little less supportive of that.
And I bet there were significant generational differences about that.
There were.
Many families.
There were. But my parents were both, especially my mother, who was a naturalized citizen, was really positive about democracy and really cared about political activity. And she got very involved in the League of Women Voters, but she did a lot of other political activity and always took me to events where women were candidates.
Fabulous. Good.
And that's all of those things had an impact. And they both loved this country because they came from poverty and had the ability to make changes in their life.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of your public service career has been as a lawyer and in related
Right.
capacities, and so you must have gone to law school sometime after Berkeley.
I did.
Yeah.
I went to law school at Hastings Law School, and something that was very determinative of how I wanted to proceed after that was I was putting myself through law school because we didn't have a lot of money, and I worked as a waitress. And while I was the waitress at a Japanese restaurant in Ghirardelli Square, I noticed that we were all not being paid what we were supposed to be paid, and that included most of the waitresses who were Japanese. And so I organized them to, and we were going to join a union.
Wow.
And the management was not happy with that and fired us all.
Wow. Wow.
And so I went to the NLRB
Good for
and
you.
filed a complaint on behalf of our group. Ultimately, it did not succeed, but it made me become much more of an activist than I already was.
Wow, that's a very interesting experience. Did you get any support in doing that from either peers or teachers at the law school at the time? Did you get any backup on that, or you just did it in your private capacity?
I just did it in my private capacity.
Wow. Good.
So, and actually, I got a job with the NLRB after law school, but I didn't go because it was in Minneapolis, and I wanted to come home.
I see. That's
so I
nice.
came back to San Jose.
That's nice. In that era, were there many women peers of yours in law school? By that time, were there a lot of women? Not really?
No. When I went to law school, there were about 3% women in law school.
Very low.
And some of my experiences after law school looking for a job, although I ultimately worked as a clerk for the Superior Court, and then got a job at a local labor law firm, in fact, Morgan, Bose, Hammer, Esgar, Bledsoe, and Rucka, Bob Morgan.
That you can remember those names after all those years is, it's significant.
I do. Well, Susan Hammer was ultimately mayor. This was her husband, Phil Hammer.
Fabulous. Yeah.
So, but the one thing that I remember, and I have to this day, was I applied for a job at another San Jose law firm, and they interviewed me, sent me a letter saying, we would love to hire you, but we don't hire women to be litigators. I wanted to be like Clarence Darrow.
Yes.
And they said, no, we won't hire a woman to be a litigator, but if you want to come and be a research lawyer, you can come here.
Wow, that's outrageous. So I'm glad you were able to find the position that you did have. And,
Me too.
And it sounds like that brought you to the doorstep of the public career that we'd like to talk to you a little bit about in the second segment of our show. So thank you for sharing so much.
I appreciate it.
We'll be
Thank
back
you.
in a moment after a short break.
Okay.
Give the local Democratic Party a call at 408-445-9500. Help make a difference.
Welcome back to our show. We're meeting and speaking today with Ann Ravel, who's a candidate for State Senate in District 15. Ann, thank you for sharing so much in the first segment of our show. And you had mentioned at the end of the segment that you took a position after law school in a labor law firm. And I know that it sounds like a lot of your law practice, and I know public service related to law, has been focused on service. I know labor lawyers work with companies in advising them, or work with employees who have claims. Are there any themes that you feel kind of tie together the work that you've done and the experience that you've had?
Yes. Well, right from the beginning, when I was working in the labor law firm, and including giving free legal advice to hod carriers and other members of unions, I did a couple of pro bono cases. One of them was to help strawberry pickers working for Driscoll and Salinas, who were underpaid, and we succeeded in getting them their fair pay. Not fair enough, but fair pay. And another one was a First Amendment case for people to be able to have greater free speech rights and pass out petitions at a Pruneyard Shopping Center.
I see.
That case went to the Supreme Court.
Wow.
But those two cases, and that was my first trial,
Wow.
made me realize what I really wanted to do was to help people. Right. What I wanted to do was use the law for what it could do to change people's lives, to make our society more fair.
Wow.
And so I decided to go into public service and decided ultimately to go to the county because the county does much more in service to the public rather than streets and roads, although they do that too.
I see.
So that
What did you find in the county? What did you spend most of your time doing? What was your role? Did you work your way up through the ranks there? Because eventually you became county council, right?
I did. I worked my way up through the ranks and I did everything.
Okay, wow.
I did everything that there was to do, from adoption law to redevelopment cases to labor and employment and litigation. And in fact, one of my signature cases when I was just a deputy, was a case having to do with a woman who was not given a job at the county and then was ultimately given that job because of affirmative action. And that was the very last affirmative action case that went to the Supreme Court of the United States and was affirmed.
I see.
Never since. And I
now,
sat
as county
second
council,
chair.
were you on the good Democratic side of the case, or
yes?
You weren't.
No.
You were defending the rightness of the affirmative action policy.
Absolutely, we were defending we were defending the appointment of that woman.
Right.
There had never been a woman in this particular job classification in the county.
Wow.
So.
Well, that must have felt very personally significant to you, given the experience you had in your own hiring after law school.
Absolutely.
The idea that some jobs are not for women.
That's absolutely true.
Wow.
And when I became when I went to the county council's office, there were only a couple of women.
Right.
So it was definitely a really significant case for me. And when I became county council, I realized there is more power in the office to be able to affect change in the community, which is really what is the role of the county. And so I myself...
Well, that raises a question. As a lawyer, how did you feel? Was it clear to you who your client was? Because the Board of Supervisors would be asking you to opine on things and give them advice about things and represent the county in certain respects. But as you point out, you also have the whole community kind of...
That's exactly right, because the client of the Board of Supervisors is the community.
Right.
And that's what the whole role is. And so I felt that my job was also to help them do that and come up with ideas of my own. And so I developed a couple of programs at the county council's office that have since been replicated all over the country. One was to go after people, banks, and individuals who were defrauding seniors and financially. And so it was an elder abuse financial program, and we were able to achieve recouping by the end, and it's still going, millions of dollars on behalf of conservatees mostly. I did an educational rights program to assure that kids in dependency and in juvenile court could get their IEPs and be able to be given educational rights from school to school. Fabulous. And then I did a social justice affirmative litigation team, which since I have been gone has done lots of big cases all over the United States and all the way to the Supreme Court. My most proud moment was filing a case for lead paint poisoning. There is still lead paint on the walls.
Yes, especially in government buildings that last a long time, right? They're just encased with most recent paint.
This was for the community too, because most of it is in low-income homes in Santa Clara County, but all over the state of California, and those kids have permanent brain damage.
Yes, sad.
And the paint companies knowingly sold that because they knew that it caused that brain damage and it's irreversible, but they said they didn't care because they were minority kids.
Yeah.
And so I went after them. Ultimately, they awarded $1.5 billion for remediation.
That sounds like a very activist county council. Did you always feel well supported by the board?
Absolutely, they supported it.
Good,
I mean,
fabulous.
when I filed the lead paint case, we had a press conference, and Supervisor Blanca Alvarado was right by my side.
Good.
So they supported me in all of these things, and actually, I also decided together with San Francisco that we were going to petition the California Supreme Court on the Prop 8, saying that it was unconstitutional. And
Prop 8 was the gay marriage.
One,
yes,
right?
Marriage equality
Measure that said we could not have gay marriage.
Yeah, not a proud moment for the state electorate.
That's right. And I brought that to the Board of Supervisors, and they unanimously supported filing that petition.
Fabulous.
So that set the stage for things that I did at every stage of every level of government. At the Department of Justice, I went after pharmaceutical fraud. I went after.
Now, at the DOJ, I know that subsequent to being county council, you ended up at the State Fair Political Practices Commission. Were you at the Justice Department, with the Justice Department, the Federal Justice Department before that?
Yes.
You were, okay.
I went in 2009
I see.
with the Obama administration.
I see.
So I was a Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and I oversaw torts and consumer. And going there was really to continue my activism in the consumer area.
Right.
And because I had done that in the county, and I particularly wanted to deal with the financial meltdown. And
that was a pretty dark time.
It was
right
a dark
then.
time.
Yes.
It was terrible for most people.
Right.
And I started the case, the rating agency case that is represented in The Big Short, in case you haven't
Fabulous.
seen that.
Yeah, right, I know it.
That was my case.
Interesting. So how did they recruit you back to Sacramento to take on the Fair Political Practices Commission?
Well, what happened was, first off, even at the Justice Department at the beginning of the Obama administration, thought it was really difficult to get some things done that I really wanted to do. I wanted to settle the Katrina Ninth Ward case. I spent a lot of time on that, and there was no avail. Nobody wanted to settle it. And it was frustrating to me to not be able to get things done as quickly as I could in the county.
Yes.
And so I was asked to give some advice to the Attorney General's office. And Jerry Brown was the Attorney General at the time.
I see.
They liked my advice about how to weigh in on a case before the Supreme Court.
Good.
And I spoke to the person who was the was the Assistant Attorney General and said, you know what? I'd love to work for Jerry Brown.
Yeah.
And it was at the beginning of the campaign.
Good.
And he said, well, call me before, right closer to the election.
Yeah.
And so the night before the election, I called him and I said, I'm still interested.
Good.
And Jerry Brown actually appointed me, and I think I was one of the first people appointed to the Fair Political Practices Commission.
So there have been some shenanigans, and you're credited rightly with being assertive and aggressive and getting to the bottom of it. You want to speak a bit about that experience?
Yes. Yeah. Well, right before the election in 2012, what we later found out was $15 million was dropped in from an Arizona group that nobody knew anything about the election, and it was anti-union and anti-Governor Brown's tax.
Yeah.
And it was 2 weeks before the election, and because we didn't know who was behind it, I said, we're going to sue and take it to this California Supreme Court. From every level of court within a week and a half. The California Supreme Court met on a Sunday and told them they had to turn over their information. It turned out they ultimately agreed to just send a letter right like the weekend, literally before the election. And what they said was, oh, yes, we engaged in money laundering.
Basically, right?
Basically. And after we investigated, we found out it was Koch brothers groups.
Right. Well, that was a great effort, and I know it led to an awareness that helped to make there be changes in California law. You went on to a distinguished service at. I want to make sure that you have a chance to talk about your current campaign before we run out of time.
I will. Let me just tell you that actually that law, I wrote it.
Good, fabulous.
So that I feel
you knew what they had done, and you knew how to tighten up the loopholes that they thought they were going through. That's fabulous.
It still needs more tightening.
Yes. So we may not get a chance to talk about your service at the FEC, which led from that. But you're running now for state senate. And what's the top thing you'd like to do as a state senator?
There are two things that I feel really strongly about. And we can start with one, which has to do with integrity and ethics, and making sure that we make changes in our campaign finance system so that people are accountable and everybody has transparency about what's happening in our political campaigns. And so I know a lot about that subject. I already have ideas in my mind about what I would like to enact, but I think it's a base.
What's the second before we run out of time?
The second is obviously economic issues. So it's housing, affordable housing, really truly affordable housing, homeless housing. We know that we have a huge issue. Transportation, I care a lot about issues that affect women and families, like early childhood education and affordable quality childcare.
Fabulous. Well, I appreciate the time you spent with us today. Thank you so much for sharing so much about your experience and your hopes. Ann at ravel4ca.com.
That's it.
That's your email address for your campaign. Hopefully people will contact you there.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching DTV. Give us a call at 408-445-9500 or visit our website at www.sccdp.org. Help us to make a difference. We'll see you on the campaign trail.